Okay, so good evening, everyone. My name's Jane Fowler, and I'm also going to be talking about autoethnography this evening. And my dissertation was titled Wholehearted, a midwife's journey of mindfulness and integration on the delivery suite. And basically what I found was that, well, being a midwife, I've worked for 20 years in different settings. So I've worked in education, I've worked in the community and in hospitals. And at the essence, midwifery has at its heart a very holistic model of care. And that model of care encompasses values such as compassion and partnership and interconnection. Whereas what's really interesting is having worked as well in different parts of the world, the Western world. For example, in New Zealand, we know that 85% of people actually have their babies in a hospital environment, which is very much dominated by the medical model. And as a midwife who's worked on the delivery suite in a hospital environment, dominated by the medical model, I actually found that there was many challenging, difficult experiences that were coming up for me. And this inquiry was really a good opportunity for me to be able to apply mindfulness and integration to those experiences. So in brief, I'm going to talk about the midwifery global crisis in the presentation and how I used the theory of holism to guide the inquiry. I'll talk about what I mean by mindfulness and integration and how I created and introduced the framework of mindfulness integration to apply that to the difficult experiences. I'll touch on the methodology, the findings that culminated in themes, and the conclusion. Next slide, please. So why is it important? What's significant about looking into midwives' experiences of the workplace? Well, what we know is that very sadly, there's a global midwifery crisis, and there's a deficit of 1.1 million midwives and maternity workers worldwide. And midwives are really important because the first 1,000 days from conception is actually the most critical part of any one of our developments. And midwives are the guardians of that transition into life. So what I sadly found in the research, in the midwifery research, was there was huge evidence of workplace stress, burnout, poor retention rates, and poor working conditions. So it's really highlights the importance of why it's good to look into midwifery experience and what we can do to help midwives. Next slide. So I'm just going to take a mindful pause now in the presentation, and I want to share with you a really inspiring quote that I think really captures and expressed the depth of concern I had in sharing and looking into the deep experiences, and also the passion in applying mindfulness and integration to those experiences in order to help make sense of what was happening. So this is Charles Eisenstein, and he said, "At the other side of despair is fullness and an urgency to live life beautifully. We can choose to live a different world, the more beautiful world that our hearts tell us is possible. But to choose it, we must be fully familiar with what we are choosing. We must be fully cognizant upon the world we have chosen up until now. Knowing the pain of the world fills me with energy and confirms the rightness of my life's direction." Okay, next slide, please. So I looked into the theory of holism. So this theory of holism actually within the autoethnographic inquiry provided a foundation, a theoretical foundation from which the whole inquiry was built upon. And it was a really fantastic reference point that I could refer my experiences to, and also refer to clinical and research findings. And essentially, theory of holism means the whole being more than the sum of its parts. And I found that the tenets of holism were very synonymous with mindfulness and integration. So these were things like interconnection, interdependence, unity, and wholeness. And Smuts and Maslow described that human evolution concerns appreciating potentiality and oneself as a meaningful, integrated whole. And what I discovered really in this whole inquiry was that worldviews were very important, because at the end of the day, our healthcare, the organisation of healthcare and the way decisions are made are very underpinned by the values that govern our culture. And so in looking at worldviews, I found that there were opposing worldviews. For example, we look at the worldview of separation, which really encompasses reductionism and values individualistic thinking and rationalist thought. This is very in linking in with the medical model. And the opposite worldview to that could be interconnection, and one of interdependence and connection, and that links into holism. Another mindful pause in the presentation. I'm just going to invite you now to reflect on this beautiful writing that was Rob Nairn, late Rob Nairn's insights from Diamond Mind. And he stated, "What is important is being present in the moment, allowing for the arising of deeper inner knowledge and ultimately insight into the nature of life. It is direct perception and learning about ourselves as human beings through direct experience that paves the way to wisdom and intelligence." So this again guided the passion that I had for pursuing this inquiry. And looking at declaring your positionality in research is obviously very important. So it was important for me to share that my mindfulness approach to the inquiry came from an ultimate truth perspective. And this is very in keeping with the philosophical concepts of interbeing and interconnection that was coined by Thich Nhat Hanh. And this statement, I feel, really summarizes this well. In shifting from a self-referential to a non-self perspective, allows practitioners to recognize the unity and mutual interdependence of all things, and transforms the way they relate to people, the environment, and the world in general. So what we're saying is that mindfulness promotes a paradigm shift from a commonly held misconception of the self as discrete, separate selves from the world around them, to understanding that we're mutually interdependent. So we're talking in essence here about mindfulness being able to help us to shift from a paradigm and a mindset of separation, individualism, and reductionist thinking towards a mindset of interconnection and interdependence and holism. And I'd like to describe what I meant by integration. So essentially, integration is forming constructs to help make sense of an experience. And I looked to Daniel Siegel, who's done a lot of work on this. And he described that the linkage of differentiated, individualized parts into an interactive, functional whole is what he describes as integration. This leads to more harmonious adaptive functioning. What we know is that mindfulness promotes integration, and mindful awareness expands our sense of self by dissolving the prison of repeating patterns of thought and response, so that constraining habits of prior learning no longer skew our perceptions, mold our emotional reactions, and restrict our behavioral options. And this all paves the way to new insights, doesn't it? And helping to feel that interconnectedness and wholeness, and this experience that can emerge from being integrated. So next, briefly touching on the methodology, I'd like to share that this autoethnography, I wrote 3 vignettes of thick descriptions, which were personal narratives telling a story that were real life experiences of my time on working on the delivery suite. I linked scholarly literature, compared and contrasted my own experiences with research evidence findings from midwifery research. During the data collection, I used memories, head notes, reflections, diary entries, and I used contemplations from meditations, all as data. And what culminated was I was able to identify emerging patterns, and then this turned into themes. In terms of self-reflexivity, I found that this was useful to help demonstrate transparency and trustworthiness within the study. But there was one limitation of the study that was key, and that was the personal bias I had that was inherent in the personal reflections and experiences that I chose to use, as well as the scholarly material that I chose to refer to. So within the study, what do I mean by the framework of mindfulness and integration that I generated? Well, this basically was comprehended to create a holistic mindfulness and integration lens so that it would help identify and interpret and analyze the difficult experiences and tensions. So I founded this framework from theories and interpretations from mindfulness research that I gleaned. And within this framework, if we look to the differentiation, what that actually meant in practice was breaking down the experiences using reflections, meditations, diary entries, and consulting with literature, untangling these experiences, breaking them down into parts, and then using mindfulness that helped cultivate spaciousness and expanded awareness around these parts. They behold the parts and their complexities so that I could look underneath, beyond, and around them. And then this helped me to move to a linkage phase of integration. So after differentiating these and untangling and breaking down these parts, I was holding them in mindfulness, spacious, and awareness. I was then able to link different parts back together, and this helped create new insights, which in the context of this inquiry helped me to identify the possible origins of the tensions that was very much in relation to culture. I think we might have bypassed the slide, I think. Oh no, I have. Okay, sorry. So findings from applying the framework of mindfulness and integration to the experiences. So sorry, if we just go back a slide. That was my mistake, Jane, thank you. The other way. So findings from applying the FMI to the experiences. We'll just have another moment pause while we get back onto the slide. Jane's very kindly sharing these slides for me today. Yeah, that's the one. Thanks, Jane. So we're sharing our screen. So what were the findings from applying this framework of mindfulness and integration to my experiences? Well, the themes that came up, the three key themes, were mindfulness acceptance, mindful acceptance. I want things to be different, a different way. So this essentially was a common thread throughout the experiences, and it was identifying resistance and struggles that I had in letting go of the things that I was coming across. Another one was carrying an excessive burden of personal responsibility. So I can talk about examples. One of the vignettes I described my personal experience of being in a delivery room and being the midwife in the room, being asked to deliver the baby, and how I was only one cog in the wheel, and how that projected so much onus of responsibility onto me when I was working in a medical culture that was very under-resourced and understaffed. The responsibility felt excessive and huge. And also impressions of trauma. So this was impressions of trauma that I experienced myself. From example, one time there was a period of a succession of maternity emergencies within an 8-day stretch that I had to attend. It was just an unfortunate culmination of events, but I was left feeling overwhelmed and numb and disconnected, suffering symptoms of trauma. And I witnessed those symptoms many times in other people as well, which often led to an ambivalence of care. And so with these three themes, I was able to apply the framework of mindfulness integration onto them and use my professional experience and research, sit with them in meditation, use expanded awareness and spaciousness, And with that, to holding these themes, I then came up with two broader themes that really meant there was discussion within the wider socio-political environment of healthcare that was needed. And this related very much to a medical model culture and a normalizing culture. Okay. So within a medical model culture, what we found was lots of evidence of patriarchy and fostering dependency rather than personal agency in the health system, which contributed to an onus of responsibility being carried by the midwife. And just the term in the medical model, I'm going to deliver the baby, as opposed to I'm going to facilitate you birthing your baby, that which was in a midwifery term. The medical model term, deliver, really implies the onus is on the midwife, and it really takes away from the amazing efforts of the birthing mother. But I found there was evidence of individualistic and reductionist approaches that probably would be causing suffering, the whole exacerbation of this onus of responsibility on the midwife's shoulders carries in a lot of hardship. And there was much evidence of unhealthy healthcare culture in forms of bullying and trauma, and lots of tensions around what appears to be a normalizing of this culture. Evidence of dehumanization, system-focused care rather than person-centered care. And when I found that applying mindfulness and integration to these emerging tensions helped me to underscore and challenge these dehumanizing practices that I found were often complicit within this normalizing healthcare culture. Okay. So to summarize, this autoethnographic inquiry that applied this generated framework of mindfulness and integration to my real life experiences led to the emergence of tensions and then the discovery of insights. And one of those insights was that difficulties for midwives can arise out of culture and worldviews. And within this context, it was a medical model culture. And this was very much influenced by rationalistic worldviews of separation, and was rooted in individualism and reductionism. And essentially, the notions of this excessive accountability that was put onto the midwives, this desire for control within the system, within this paradigm, I felt may be culminating in a healthcare culture that is inciting suffering, perpetuating trauma, and whose practices at times may be described as dehumanizing. And what I wrote was that failure to see the reality and truth of our wounds denies us the realization that is necessary for critically addressing this urgent crisis that we have in midwifery. Okay. So with applying this framework of mindfulness and integration, what I learned was that it's really important to value all the parts within the whole. And I found that this framework of mindfulness and integration was very much an essential holistic tool that we could use. And so with mindfulness, creating spaciousness to be able to pay attention to and name and incorporate an inclusive approach to all the parts, whether they've differentiated or whether they're fragmented parts, allows these parts to be held, allows them to be looked at underneath and beyond, so that we can then realize the whole human story. So mindfulness helped with expanded awareness. It allowed, rather than falling victim to the suppression and oppression of the normalizing culture, it allowed areas to be identified so that we could confront the crisis in midwifery. And to end, essentially, I discovered that this holistic approach in helping overcome reductionism in the medical model may really support the realization of potentials within healthcare staff and help healthcare to flourish, which in essence would help humanity as a whole. Okay, thank you. Would anybody like to ask any questions?